name is Camila Ramos. I lead developer evangelism at Berachain. Berachain is an EVM identical L1 that turns liquidity into security.
How did you get into crypto? What brought you to crypto?
Because I was at PayPal, I was doing full stack engineering, and I remember being like, I really don't like this. Like, I really like back-end engineering because it's just so much more clean cut and clear. Like, tech has converged across L1s and L2s for the most part, right? Like, there's very little tech differentiation at this point. I think a lot of people view Berachain as a DeFi chain, which is fine, it's good, but there's also so many non-DeFi projects building on Berachain that, like I said, tech in general, pretty much is standard across the board.
Do you ever worry about if all of these kind of economic dynamics and games make just kind of participating in the ecosystem difficult for a new developer or a new protocol or a new user?
At the end of the day, it's really not hard. I think it's just a new kind of like dimension.
What are you excited about for Berachain in coming weeks and months?
I'm excited to continue seeing new developers and teams join the ecosystem. I'm really excited to see kind of all the teams that were on V1 deploying now on V2, and us really getting to experiment and users really getting to experiment with POL kind of in like a semi-real environment.
Awesome. Welcome to the podcast. Can I start with you introducing yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name is Camila Ramos.
Perfect. And what do you do?
I lead developer evangelism at Berachain.
That's funny. I noticed that like shift to DevRel, from DevRel to developer evangelism. To get right into it, can we talk about like what that means and why you have that title in specific?
I think it mostly depends. DevRel is such a kind of wide range of things, and it really changes a lot from company to company. And my take is kind of like for organizations that already have a pretty well-defined understanding of developer relations and maybe even already have a developer relations team, they have the freedom to get a little bit more specific in the roles that they're hiring for. Whereas if you're like an earlier stage company or you're hiring for your first DevRel, you're just like DevRel, anything that lands in DevRel, whether it be more education focused, more marketing focused, more solutions engineering focused, they tend to kind of just bucket them all as DevRel. Whereas I think when you're either later stage or you just like already have a team, you have that flexibility to say, okay, my team already has X, Y, and Z talent and skills, and I'm looking to fill this very specific kind of sub role of developer relations. And so I think that's the case at Berachain, where when I joined, there was already a really great DevRel team there that had a very specific kind of focus, which is a lot more around integrations and solutions engineering. Whereas my focus in DevRel traditionally has been more on the educational and evangelism side. So I think it was just kind of like making that concrete and making that differentiation within the organization.
Fantastic. Can you, for people who might have not gotten up to speed on Berachain itself, can you give us like the 60-second explanation of Berachain? I know that's hard to do because I think it really ties into your work as a developer evangelist.
Yeah, totally. So the 60-second breakdown. So Berachain is an EVM identical L1 that turns liquidity into security. And that might sound like, what the fuck does that mean? And I think we'll get into it a little bit later in this interview. But it's powered by what Berachain came up with and they call proof of liquidity. And maybe I can pause and give you a second to maybe ask what else you wanted to ask. But the TLDR is like most chains have two kind of options, and users on the chains have two options. As a user, you can either bring your liquidity and use it to secure the network, i.e. like stake or, delegate your Ethereum or your ETH so it could be staked and secure the network. Or you can use that capital to make it useful in the ecosystem. And by useful, I mean, it could be like literally like trading, or it can be providing liquidity to a DEX and anything in between. And the dilemma that arises is like, well, as a user, you have a set amount of capital and you have to choose one or the other. And Berachain says, what if you could do both? What if you could use any asset to secure the network and use that same asset to use it in the ecosystem, whether it be providing liquidity or actually just like using it in the ecosystem?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do want to come back to this, and I would really like to get into Berachain stuff. But first, I'd like to hear a little bit more about you. So you started in a trad tech background, and I think you were working in developer relations at that time. Is that the case?
So I started my career in engineering, like traditional engineering in trad tech.
Okay.
And then I moved to developer relations also while I was in Web 2. And when I got into crypto, I came into it doing developer relations. So the whole time I've been in crypto since like late 2021, it's been doing DevRel.
And how did you get into crypto? What brought you to crypto?
I got into crypto because I was at PayPal around the time where, at the time, it was unbeknownst to me, but they were working on the Venmo crypto wallet. And around the same time, I started seeing like Web3 stuff on my Twitter for the first time. I remember following and seeing Natter's account for the first time. And so I had been aware of crypto since high school. I was in high school like 2012 to 2016. And I bought my first crypto in high school, like 2015. But I didn't know about crypto as an engineering discipline until this time when I was at PayPal. And so, yeah, I started seeing it a bunch. And then this was right around the time when Build Space first came out, and they had launched their very first kind of course on Web3 engineering. And
Mm-hmm.
I took it just because I was curious, and it was really interesting. And I remember at the time, because I was at PayPal, I was doing full stack engineering, and I remember being like, I really don't like this. Like, I really like back end engineering because it's just so much more clean cut and clear. Like, you're just writing a bunch of functions that then you call later. Whereas I remember at the
Mm-hmm.
time being like, oh my god, front end is like it's just not what I like. So when I discovered smart contract engineering, I was like, oh my god, this is exactly what I like. Like, you just write a bunch of functions. It's
Mm-hmm.
super clear, super encapsulated, and then you just use them. And so that's how I got into crypto as an engineer. And a couple months later, I started experimenting with the graph because at the time that's where Natter worked. And because I worked with GraphQL at PayPal, I remember thinking, they use GraphQL. I know how to use GraphQL. This should be really easy. And so I started experimenting with that. I ended up putting together a blog post just for myself, really, as I went through the process and learned how to do it. I published it and, kind of got in the hands of the people working at the graph of leadership. And they ended up reaching out to me and offering me a job. And like a week later, I was having lunch with Yaniv and SF accepting a job offer. And that's how I started working at the graph in Web3.
Mm-hmm. And then recently you've taken a step to Berachain. So what was your evolution, and then how did you arrive specifically at Berachain?
So the evolution was basically I started at the graph doing developer relations. Then I moved on to Fuel, where I led the developer relations team. I joined really early pre-testnet and I built out a team there, which is a really awesome experience. For those who maybe aren't familiar, Fuel is a non-EVM layer 2. So there was a lot of interesting things there for me because I got to learn and work through the whole stack, which was something that was really new for me because at the graph, they do one very specific thing as an indexing and query protocol versus going to Fuel, where it's like we're building our own VM from scratch. We're building a programming language from scratch. We're building a new tool chain, new SDKs, everything from scratch. So I got to learn a lot about the whole part of the stack, which was really interesting. And then maybe like 2 or 3 months ago, I joined Berachain. Wow, I guess it's been longer. I joined end of March. I joined Berachain full time to lead developer evangelism, and I had been following Berachain and some people who worked at Berachain on Twitter for some time. But when I got really interested in Berachain was kind of when I started developing my thesis on, I call it anti-chain abstraction. And it's kind of like tongue in cheek because I know this is not truly the chain abstraction thesis, but TLDR is like, chain abstraction people say, one day users won't know what chain they're on. They'll be able to use any asset from any chain at any time. And, you won't need to like know the ins and outs of like how to bridge and what chain you're on and switching networks, etc. And around this time, I was like, I think the opposite. I think users will know what chain they're on. And even a step further, I think users will have loyalty and brand attachment to the chains they're on. In the same
Mm-hmm.
way that consumers do this for brands of food, of clothing, of cars, I think the same thing will happen for blockchains. And so around this time is when I really got interested in Berachain because I said, I think the teams that are going to win are teams that are able to build a strong brand outside of crypto, that they're able to build something that people who don't even know or care about crypto like the swag, they like the name, they like the mascot, they think it's cool. In the same way that like literally anything. Like I don't care about cars. I don't know anything about cars. And if you ask me to pick like what's my dream car, I'm gonna pick it based off right. I'm gonna say like a Porsche because I love the brand. I love the aesthetic, the luxury vibe. But if you were
Mm-hmm.
to tell me about why there's better cars, there's faster cars, there's cheaper cars, there's cars that are like more bang for your buck or whatever like stat you want to pull out, I'll say I don't care because I don't care about these stats. I don't care about whatever horsepower. Like I care about the brand. I like the vibe. It's something that has it has my attention. So I think that's kind of when I started getting really interested in Berachain and how I kind of formed my thesis and ended up there eventually.
It's interesting because I think in the US that's the case. And like we've seen it with Ethereum, right? People are willing to pay a tremendous premium to transact on Ethereum. However, I know you're Colombia based, and I've lived in LATAM, and I feel like those markets are places where it is kind of people are kind of chain agnostic. Like I know Tron is big for remittances, different, people are a lot more cost sensitive, stuff like that. I know there's a lot of crypto kind of wallet payment integration apps in Colombia specifically. I guess this is kind of a two-parter, but one, uh, do you see that dynamic playing out internationally of this kind of like chain loyalty? And then two, how would you see Berachain fitting into something like, the global south or emerging markets?
I do think it's something that's going to play out globally because even though there are populations that are more price sensitive, that goes into your brand allegiance. Like that is part of why you like a brand or why you don't like a brand. So, like I said, even though there's populations that are cost sensitive, and I do think that there will be cases where, right, like even in day to day consumerism, like there's cases where I use things of brands that I don't love. I'm just using them because they have the thing that I want. Like I don't particularly care for like Walgreens or any of these random things, but it's like I know that's where I can get chapstick for $1. Like then I'm just gonna go get the chapstick for $1. I don't have to go to Target to find my chapstick. So I think these type of like patterns will play out where you have loyalty to a chain or a brand. But I also think that there is exceptions for when something you need is either not available or not priced at the price point that you want, that you're willing to go outside of those bounds to get what you want. And then in terms of Berachain and kind of how it fits into the global south, it's interesting because it's kind of hard to say because we're on testnet. It's hard to say like what real numbers will look like, what the cost for users will be to transact. So, really impossible for me to comment on that part specifically right now. But I do kind of want to go back to my point of like, I think Berachain is really like one of 2 or 3 teams in the space that actually has a strong brand, has a shot of building a brand outside of crypto. And what's interesting is what I'm saying is like, let's just say for, the scenario that we're going to play out, let's say Berachain is too expensive to use in like some parts of the world. I still think unironically it'll have brand loyalty and like people excited about it because the thesis is that it grows to be something more than a blockchain, right? Like people like the
Mm-hmm.
brand, people are going to wear the clothes, people are going to like the hats, the hats, the bears, the bear heads, like, they're going to want the t-shirts, even though they might
Right.
not transact on the chain. I think that there still will be that sense of not even necessarily brand loyalty because it's not about loyalty, but brand, that you like this brand, that you love this brand, that you think it's cool and that you want to participate in it. It's kind of like what
Yeah,
we
like
see now. Sorry to interrupt you, but kind of like what we're starting to see with Bera baddies. Like, what is Bera baddies? There's no service, there's no blockchain, there's nothing you can use. Everyone wants the Bera baddies swag. Everyone wants to come to the Bera baddies event. Why? Because it's cool, because it's cute, because it's something that
mm-hmm.
attracts a certain type of demographic that's very targeted that doesn't really exist in crypto. So I think something similar will happen with Berachain globally.
Yeah, it's almost like a streetwear brand or like some type of fashion house or something
Yeah,
integrated into a blockchain. Yeah, that's
yeah.
cool. So one thing I've noticed with Berachain is a lot of projects have fundraised, especially for a pre-token layer one. Like you have an incredible depth of people building on top. What's your involvement, and if you'd like, can you highlight a couple of these projects?
Yes, a bunch of teams have raised recently, even just in the time that I've been here. Off the top of my head, I know Shogun raised. I think Baritone announced their raise recently. There's probably a few other teams that I just can't remember, but maybe we can add it in the show notes for people to take a look. Honestly,
Sure.
my involvement on the fundraising side is non-existent. I also have only been here for a couple months. So I think a lot of this has been in process for a long time. But that is one thing that I always kind of highlight to developers when they're thinking about what chain to build on, because the thesis that I give them and kind of my talks up until this point around Berachain have been tech has converged across L1s and L2s for the most part, right? Like there's very little tech differentiation at this point. All, or most successful chains that actually have users that have applications are AVM. So once you like start from there, there's really not that much differentiation that can happen within that. And even if you do look at the differentiation within the EVM world, there's nothing that like crazy. There's these parallel EVM projects which like are just kind of now coming into production. I think Say is in production. People are waiting for a few more to come in, but really there's not that much tech differentiation. So the real differentiator is like the ecosystem and the type of distribution that you can get. And the fact that a bunch of teams have already raised on Berachain and Berachain is pre-mained, I think is a really strong signal that when the ecosystem is really strong and you as a builder are going to have a really deep and wide network for collaboration and kind of just for like co-marketing opportunities, which are really valuable. And also for the type of distribution that you get. Like if you look at some of these projects like Kodiak, like, Exponents, like Gummy, they all have really, really strong communities of people who are interested in the products. You go to their Twitters and it's like in the hundreds of thousands of followers. And to me as a developer, like this is one of the strongest signals when considering where to build, given that, at a tech level, it's kind of all the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. I think also Berachain is kind of hoping for and simultaneously building out this kind of like DeFi revival, where it feels like recently we've seen this contraction in the space. People are kind of bullish on or bearish on everything except, meme coins. It seems like there's so much attention. I guess Bera is a meme in and of itself, but there's also a DeFi ecosystem being built out. In what ways are you bullish on that DeFi thesis, and how do you think Bera can kind of reinvigorate the entire DeFi ecosystem?
Yeah, I'm super bullish on DeFi stuff on Berachain, but and actually one of the more interesting things is that I think a lot of people view Berachain as a DeFi chain, which is fine, it's good. But there's also so many non-DeFi projects building on Berachain that are going to be able to leverage proof of liquidity, which I mentioned a little bit earlier. Maybe we can get into now. And
Sure.
I think this like I said, tech in general, pretty much is standard across the board. And I think what Berachain is bringing to the table with this kind of novel method of incentive alignment, of tokenomics via POL is what actually is going to make things interesting both for users and for protocols and devs.
So I would really love to dig into that because, yeah, I mean, even like I'm an investor and I really view Berachain and part of my thesis is really around this DeFi ecosystem. In what way are projects that aren't DeFi related leveraging POL to build on Berachain?
So first, maybe let me give you an overview of like POL and why it exists and kind of the thesis behind it. So I'm actually going to take this out of a blog that we just published this morning to kind of set the stage and set the context. So most chains actually have more assets and more value staked than they actually have to secure. Like the TVL is lower than the amount it takes to secure the network. So that's like one side. And this is kind of what you called in this blog post when there's too much weight on security. So you have all these assets staked securing the network, but the assets that you're securing is less than how much you had to spend to secure the network. So let's say, for a concrete example, like there's a $1 billion staked to secure network X, and the TVL on network X is 500 million. So you're spending twice the amount to secure funds, which is like, it kind of gives you this like weird sensation of like there's so much staked and it's like not really worth it. It's not really making any sense. And then on the other hand, you can have too much weight on liquidity and not enough security. And basically what POL aims to do is to scale security as more liquidity comes into the ecosystem. And so let me give you kind of my definition of POL. Proof of liquidity is a way to systemically reward those who bring productive liquidity into the ecosystem. So, and the way I describe it all the time on Twitter is like, it's a way for you to receive rewards in an ongoing and predictable manner for your liquidity in the ecosystem. And the basis of it is that there's this token, BGT, Berachain's governance token, which can only be earned via providing liquidity to the chain. And how specifically, there's, you can look at it on these things that we call gauges in the docs, but basically you have like a list of venues that say, these are the venues that are eligible that if you supply liquidity, you can earn BGT. And only this way can you earn BGT. You can't buy it. You can't send it to anyone. It's soul bound. The only thing you can do with BGT that's like maybe along the lines of sending it is to burn it one way for Bera. It's the only thing you can do. Once you have BGT, you can delegate this to a validator. And this is kind of where the interesting stuff around alignment between validators, users, and protocols comes in. Because validators on Berachain, once they get chosen to build a block, they are able to distribute some of the BGT emissions from that block to protocols of their choice. So let's say I'm validator Cami and I just built a block. And just for an example, from this block, I got 40 BGT. I'm going to direct 10 of it to protocol A, 2 of it to protocol B, 5 of it to protocol C, etc. So I'm pushing BGT emissions that I get as a validator to protocols on the chain. And then you as a user, let's say I provided liquidity to a pool called, ETH to Honey, ETH Honey pool. And that pool is receiving BGT emissions. Because I'm staking in that pool, I also get a portion of those emissions that comes through. So you can imagine how there's like a lot of interesting strategies and games that you can play to align yourself to maximize your BGT by staking in a specific gauge and then delegating to a validator that's pushing emissions to a gauge that you're already staked in. That's on one hand. And then on the other hand, we have this kind of dimension called incentives. Incentives are the marketplace for BGT emissions by validators. So because validators are the ones that push BGT emissions, incentives are the way for you to do just that, incentivize a validator and say, hey, look at me, push some BGT emissions my way. I'm willing to give you X amount of my native token in exchange for X amount of BGT. And this goes out kind of on the open market, and you can think of it as a limit order in where it remains open until it's filled completely. So if I'm a protocol and I'm saying, hey, I want to incentivize liquidity to my thing or to my pool, and, for X or Y reason, right? I want to bootstrap my liquidity. I'm going to offer 100 Cami tokens for every 10 BGT that gets my way with a max of 100 Cami tokens. And then validator A can say, okay, I'm willing to give you 1 BGT. Validator B can come in and fill and say, I'm going to give you 3 BGT. And validator C can come in and say, I'm willing to give you half BGT. And those incentives get filled that way. And now the validator has this native token, right? They have this Cami token that they just received in exchange for their BGT. They get a commission of that they get to set. And then the rest of that incentive gets distributed to the delegators of that validator. So again, I think all in all, and maybe this is getting too much into the weeds, and we have a lot of educational material already published about how this works in case you want a little bit more clarity or you kind of just want to take it all in a little bit more slowly. But the high level is like protocols can bootstrap liquidity faster and cheaper. Value capture comes to users instead of just validators. And validators have an inherent incentive for the chain to grow. Because as more activity is generated on the chain, the better it is for these validators. And the more BGT that gets delegated to them, the more rewards that they get when they build a block. So as a validator, you're also incentivized to, offer like a good percentage to those delegators and to kind of like choose your strategy in a way that's attractive to delegators. So it's really just like a fun game of incentives alignment that doesn't really exist in other places, because in other ecosystems, validators are almost completely disconnected from the ecosystem in which they're securing. They're just like they're, running software, building blocks, but they have no like real connection to the protocols building on the chain or the users.
Yeah, it reminds me of kind of like miner dynamics, right? Where when people think about Bitcoin as a protocol, they think about miners as one of the stakeholders, where I don't think the average person is interacting with DeFi and thinking about Ethereum validators, but this kind of brings them into the stakeholder equation in a much more, defined manner. So it's a really interesting dynamic. Do you ever worry about if all of these kind of economic dynamics and games make just kind of participating in the ecosystem difficult for a new developer or a new protocol or a new user?
I think that risk definitely exists, and it's, the crux of my job here at Berachain is to make sure that doesn't happen, to make POL one as easy as possible to understand and create the material so that anyone new coming into the ecosystem can kind of get over that learning curve really quickly. Because at the end of the day, it's really not hard. I think it's just a new kind of like dimension. It's like you're starting to play like 3D chess instead of 2D chess. So it's nothing that's like
Mm-hmm.
super crazy hard where you like need to study and like read a white paper, but you just kind of need to like understand this new dimension in the game that you're playing. I do think the risk exists, but like my job and like our job, everyone's job is to make sure that this doesn't happen. And in the last like 2 weeks, we've put out a bunch of material on POL, and we'll continue to do so.
And then the other question I have is around your first testnet came out a while ago. I forget how long, and then recently, I think in the last week or so, your kind of second testnet came out. Is that correct?
Yeah.
With kind of adding kind of some of the POL dynamics in. However, I don't think anyone will truly understand how any of the Berachain experiment plays out until there are real dollars on the line. How do you guys kind of prepare for that or think about that? This is kind of like a real-time economic experiment and kind of at least like plan for that.
Yeah. I think on the DevRel, dev evangelism side, like I said, the best thing that we can do is to like really educate and prepare people. And I'm actually like right now putting together a post for saying just this, right? Like testnet is a great time for people who are Berachain curious, who haven't gotten around to it, to start playing with POL such that there's no real assets on the line. You can be confused, you can ask questions, you can make mistakes, and nothing will happen. So that when mainnet comes around, on testnet, you can do everything with POL live today. Like all of the apps are live, all of the native dApps are live, BGT station is live. You can do kind of all of the steps that you would normally do on mainnet now. And, in terms of like what is the team doing to prepare for like what this might look like on mainnet or, when there's real money, like testnets are all about stress testing the chain, making sure things work as intended. And, recently we lowered the minimum like ETH balance in your mainnet wallet to access the testnet to get test Bera. With this in mind, like once that we've gotten a little bit of confidence in what's going on at the current rate, like we open the floodgates a little bit more, and we'll continue doing that and continue load testing and continue getting bug reports and like updating things so that when mainnet comes around, everything is super polished and works the way that we expect.
Um, to follow up on a question I asked previously, protocols that aren't directly affiliated with DeFi benefiting from protocol owned liquidity, or sorry, proof of liquidity. Can you talk about anyone doing interesting stuff with that dynamic?
Yeah. So basically, like any protocol that has a token can take advantage of proof of liquidity, regardless of if you're a DeFi app or not. Because at the very center of POL is this goal of helping protocols bootstrap their liquidity. So what do we mean when we say bootstrap your liquidity, right? Like if you have a token, someone needs to provide the liquidity for your token so that people can actually trade it. Because if you have a token with no liquidity, then it's, no one can trade it, and then it basically becomes worthless. And when a lot of protocols are new, like this is something that they have to go through. They figure out who's going to provide liquidity for my token so that it can become tradable and therefore like it can actually be worth something. So POL says anyone can permissionlessly go through governance and create a proposal and say, hey, I want to whitelist my pool. Let's say I'm starting a protocol and it's called Cami to honey or whatever, Cami to ETH. And I need liquidity for this pool so that my token can become tradable. Through POL, if this gets approved, validators will start pushing BGT emissions to this pool. And when validators start pushing BGT emissions to this pool, that incentivizes liquidity providers to provide liquidity because it's generating BGT emissions. Like it's getting an extra reward on top of just LP fees. So if I'm an LP and I'm like, okay, I have a limited amount of capital, I can either provide liquidity to a pool that's just generating LP fees or a pool that's generating LP fees and BGT. I'm obviously going to go for the one that generates LP fees and BGT. And so the idea is like you incentivize more liquidity providers to provide liquidity to the specific pool. And boom, now this protocol has bootstrapped their liquidity faster and cheaper than kind of the alternative methods that exist. So even if you're not a DeFi protocol, any protocol that has a token can tap into POL, and like it will be a better experience than the existing routes for bootstrapping liquidity.
I think that gets into kind of part of how your job has changed from maybe something like Fuel, which I imagine DevRel is kind of highly technical focused, or like really nuts and bolts type stuff, where then anyone building on Berachain needs to understand and participate in these kind of like economic dynamics. How has your job changed, and has it gotten any easier, harder, in what ways?
I think it's changed quite a bit. Also because, like I said, Berachain already has a really stellar DevRel team that handles a lot of the things that I used to do. Like I said, before at Fuel, I was the first DevRel hire. So I did like the whole spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
like from solutions engineering to education to evangelism to marketing. Like I did a lot of things in there. And here, because we have a really well-defined DevRel team, I get to focus on this kind of like more educational evangelism front, which is around helping developers understand exactly what we've been talking about in this call and helping them understand like what does it mean to pick an ecosystem in 2024 and beyond. And so I think it's changed a lot, where my focus is a lot more around like writing and education. Whereas at Fuel, like I was maybe a little bit more focused on like explaining different VM architectures and explaining like
Mm-hmm.
what account abstraction and predicates and just like things that are maybe a little bit more in the weeds around like engineering. Whereas here it's like maybe a little bit more meta and a little bit higher up in the stack.
Right. I'm also curious how you think about Berachain in the like, in the stack of all of the chains, right? So Berachain is EVM, an EVM chain, so obviously participating in kind of like the ETH world, and then it's a Cosmos chain as well, so participating in the Cosmos ecosystem as well. How do you think about Berachain's kind of alignment or philosophy in the world of chains?
Yeah, so maybe for listeners who are like, what, like Ethereum chain, Cosmos chain. So the chain architecture for Berachain can be thought of as a split. It uses a Cosmos consensus client and an Ethereum execution client. And so this is similar to ETH2, where consensus and execution layer are separated. And in our case, the consensus layer is Berachain's proprietary beacon kit, which we just published a really cool article about for people who want to learn more and think about contributing. And was your question, sorry, like how do I think about like where it
How
kind of
does
lands?
Berachain kind of exist in this, exist in this larger ecosystem?
Yeah, I think the vibe is like we want to take the best of both worlds, like take the best of Cosmos, take the best of Ethereum. And, in my view, like the best of Ethereum is the ability to use the EVM, the ability to tap into this like rich developer community while having, sort of the flexibility and the customizability that Cosmos can offer.
And then as far as kind of like the meme based, as you talk about this brand, do you think that aids in your job or makes it difficult in some cases? Like, I imagine kind of on a crypto native side, it might make things easier, but perhaps if you're engaging with like, an institution that might be tricky. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think luckily for me, like I'm kind of like I don't really interact with kind of these more corporate or like yeah, like institutional partners. So like luckily for me, I don't really have to think about it too much. I think sometimes it can be challenging for new people to really almost like take Berachain seriously on a technical level because they kind of just think of it as a meme. And I do think the
Mm-hmm.
team has done a really good job of like building a brand that stands out and building a brand that's memorable. And I think now we're all really focused on also highlighting, especially now that we have testnet, is like really highlighting the technical merits of the chain and just making people aware of like this also exists. Like, yes, it's an amazing brand. Yes, it's cool vibes. Yes, it's really funny. Also, we're building like one of the coolest crypto experiments, in the market right now.
Right. What are you excited about for Berachain in coming weeks and months?
What am I excited about? I'm excited to continue seeing new developers and teams join the ecosystem. I'm really excited for mainnet, and I'm really excited to see kind of all the teams that were on V1 deploying now on V2 and us really getting to experiment and users really getting to experiment with POL kind of in like a semi-real environment. Like for example,
Mm-hmm.
Kodiak is already live on V2 and a few other teams. Yeet is already live on V2. So today you can go and interact with these teams that are building on Berachain and kind of see like what is it like, for example, to provide liquidity on Kodiak, and then how do you interact with Yeet, And these are all things that you're going to want to be able to do on mainnet that you can already do today. So I'm excited to kind of see everything come together and have people get that experience now while we're on testnet.
Do you have any goals specifically for yourself or kind of on a protocol level for Berachain in the coming, let's say, year?
Yeah, I think my biggest goals are making POL super, super crystal clear for crypto community, developer community, and beyond. And just like making it almost like foolproof, dumb proof. Like everyone should know what it is, exactly how it works, how they can participate. And also just attracting the best developers and the best teams from all the regions. You know, I'm based in Latin America, and I would love to see a lot of the really talented developers and teams that I know from LATAM building on Berachain. So that's kind of personally my goal.
Have teams in Latin America have teams in Latin America been receptive to building on Berachain?
You know, our testnet v2 just came out, and I think we're just now only starting to really kick into high gear recruiting new developers to the ecosystem. So, you know, I wouldn't say like I don't think there's that much data to say yes or no. I'm also really new, but I do know that like people are really excited about in LATAM, and yeah, I think we're only just now going to start to see, yeah, like teams coming because it just became kind of a possibility with V2.
Fantastic. Awesome. I think that's a great note to wrap things up on. Thank you for your time. Where can people reach you? Anything you'd like to plug right now?
No, thank you. Yeah, maybe people can follow me on Twitter at Cami and this thing. And I think another great resource is the Berachain developer docs and also the Berachain blog. You know, we have Noah from my team, who's an awesome writer who publishes things almost on a weekly basis. I'm publishing a lot. Smokey's writing a lot. Dev, our CTO, is writing a lot. So it's a great place to come and learn.
Fantastic. And if Cami's mentioned it, I'll link it below in the description here, so anyone who's curious can find it. Thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jack.